Welcome back to another Wednesday Night Fightback. Now, the Global Monitoring Laboratory, which is responsible for producing figures on global warming, has produced a series of figures which you commented on, Michael, and it's not looking good, is it? All of the key metrics are going in the wrong direction, including CO2. What's your general reaction to this?
Well, I started looking at this. This is from the Global Monitoring Laboratory in Hawaii, and every month they take atmospheric readings from Mount Haleakala for the main greenhouse gases, and they've been doing it for years, and they are, as far as I know, the source. And we're told to follow the science, and this is what the science says on CO2. There has been no progress at all since COP 1995, which is when we first had global efforts trying to cut CO2 emissions. In fact, CO2 concentrations have been going up at an absolutely uninterrupted linear pace. There is no noticeable impact whatsoever on that rise, none. So the thing I take from that, most importantly, is that current efforts have failed. Then there is no reason at all to expect them to succeed ever. That's the first thing. They then look at three other gases. Methane, which actually methane is an easy game because it dissipates quite easily and quickly in the atmosphere. But in fact, there's no slowdown at all, and the concentrations are growing at really record levels. And that's the pace of growth, not the actual concentration. The rise in those levels is growing at a record pace over the last couple of years. Then there's nitrous oxide, and again, there's no slowdown in the growth of concentrations, and concentrations, the growth of nitrous oxide in the atmosphere it's growing at near record levels. And then you have the really the really bad one, which is sulfur hexafluoride, which is used in the electronics industry. And sulfur hexafluoride is a trace gas, but it is thousands of times more powerful as a greenhouse gas than carbon. And again, we used to have very, very modest progress in slowing the growth of that, but concentrations are still growing at around 3.5% to 4% a year, which they have been since around 2010. Now, what this tells you, and it's a really important message, is that current policies have failed, are failing, and there is no reason in the data whatsoever to expect them to succeed in the future. All the efforts, all the propaganda, all the taxes, all the subsidies add up to a big, fat nothing when it comes to doing whatever needs to be done about the climate gases.
Okay, obviously the data is what it is, and it shows, as you say, the line is just continuing. It's pretty much linear. It's not hockey stick. It's just continuing on carbon. What is it, 410, 420?
Oh, well, whatever it is this month, it'll be a bit more later, yeah.
Yeah, a little bit more. The counter to your argument is that but for the efforts that have been made already, it would be worse, wouldn't it? Do you accept that?
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Because you get there anyway. That's what your point is. You're going to get
carbon dioxide hangs around the atmosphere for probably about 300 years. So, this is not a quick fix. Whatever is going to happen because of greenhouse gases is going to happen. And nothing we can do now is going to change that. Nothing.
And if you accept that, then your policy has to switch quite markedly, doesn't it? You look at mitigation and protection at least as much as decarbonisation, surely.
Well, certainly for Britain, that's absolutely clear. If greenhouse gases are in fact behind global warming, and actually I believe they are, I think that you've got a lot smarter people now measuring global temperatures, which is a very, very difficult task. And they all concur that it is rising. And even though the signal is noisy, I think you have to be perverse to think it's not rising. So yes, I think it's going to continue rising. And therefore we have to think about what to do about that. Now, we have a couple of things of good news. The first is
Thank
that
the Lord.
is that when you look at what the scientists are predicting in terms of who gets hit hardest by rises in global temperatures, the good news is that Britain gets hit hardly at all.
Mm.
There are some scary scenarios out there for other places, but for Britain, there really isn't. I mean, they have all these colored graphs showing the changes, and Britain just sits there being continually a slightly chilling island off Europe.
Yes, yes.
So nothing, the urgency of mitigation is not huge for the UK. That's the first thing to say. We will survive. The second thing to say, and it's an important one, I think really important. I've been reading a lot of this guy, David Deutsch. I don't know if you know about David Deutsch, but he's a professor of quantum physics at Oxford, so he's a smart guy. And he makes a very, very simple, powerful point, and that is that we should not view the world environment as being friendly to human beings.
Yes.
The world environment is only survivable because of the mitigation we put in. As he puts it, even in Oxford, without human involvement, he'd be, the Oxfordshire countryside would kill him within days.
Yes, it doesn't owe you anything, Michael. You've got to find your own way. Yeah. And
most species it will kill because the environment is not friendly, and it's not going to be friendly. But his point is that everything, our survivability now and always, has depended on mitigation and on the use of technology in order to affect the mitigations for the dangers that the climate and the environment will throw at us.
Mm.
And I think that's a very, very important point, because he says, look, there are always going to be problems, but there will always be solutions. But solutions tend to involve wealth, and because wealth is knowledge and the physical expression of that knowledge. Mm. That's how he defines wealth.
I'd agree with that. I think that's a very fair point. But I think another point that needs to be made, particularly in relation to the eco warriors that are gluing themselves to roads and disrupting the Shell. I think it's the Shell public meeting today was completely disrupted by protesters, is that they should be faced down, because actually a sudden shift, a breakdown, a complete collapse in Western and international economies would produce social chaos and probably war and other conflict, which would in turn inevitably produce environmental disaster far worse than continuing with what we're doing.
Of course, mitigation depends on wealth. And if you decide that in order to, your best idea of mitigating is to destroy the economy because that stops CO2 emissions, then you are mad. Either that, or you are very, very, very stupid. And I think they must be very, very stupid.
And the other point I'd raise in relation to some of the zealots is that when you say, they say, well, you've got to stop the Western economies and consumption-based economies, production-based economies. We all want to stop that because of CO2. And then you say, well, let's deal with it by having a civil nuclear power program, a big one. And they say, quite a lot of them say, oh no, well, let's not do that. You sort of face them down a bit. They're not serious about that. I think we should do that anyway. I think it will be a very reliable method of getting base load. If you look at the pipeline in the UK, offshore primarily, but onshore wind as well, you're getting to be, I have qualms about who owns that, a lot of that stuff actually, Michael, but if you put that aside, the UK is emerging as a sort of renewables superpower, but base load is still unanswered. We still don't have an answer to it, and we won't have an answer to it until we roll out domestic nuclear at scale again. But if we do, then we have actually a wonderful situation where you have a lot of wind power and you have base load from nuclear. That's it.
Well, I'm going to partially agree with you. Getting there, it worries me that things like offshore wind involve basically taking money from the poorest people in Britain and giving it to the people who own the offshore wind terminals, which tend to be the richest people in Britain.
Yeah,
I think there's a nasty sort of redistribution going on there, which nobody, I think, really wants. But there's a bugbear here of mine, so I should alert you. We're going back to Drax.
Drax, but yes,
Drax power station, I think, is absolutely, utterly unconscionable. The idea that Britain's green power is partly, in fact, quite largely dependent on, shipping in ships from, forested, old growth, hardwood forests in the US, and then burning it and believing that this is green is absolutely unconscionable. Absolutely unconscionable. From an environmental point of view, from a CO2 point of view, let me say this, Drax would be better off burning gas, definitely. Better off burning coal also, because what all Drax does is run up this huge carbon debt. That eventually the trees we plant will grow, and in 100 years' time, that will start it'll become neutral. We don't have 100 years. I mean, it's just...
Yeah, there's something wrong about that anyway there, Michael, there's something, you should be able to stand back from an arrangement like Drax and ask yourself, is it good for this economy to have, hardwood pellets imported? Terrible for the balance of payments. And it's not a domestic solution.
Terrible in every way, every possible way. It's a terrible, terrible thing to do.
Yeah. No, I'm with you on that. I think one thing that's worth finishing on is, although you say that I agree with you, probably the situation for the UK, the outlook for the UK because of where it is in the world may well be a reasonably benign. But the problem is that if it isn't benign, if global warming isn't benign for others in the world, they will find their way to your shores. And it's a separate debate and a separate topic. But I don't think this society, in fact, I don't think Western Europe has the will to deter people from coming en masse. And I think that potentially will be the real consequence.
I totally agree. I totally agree. There's no way that I want what I've said to be thought of as denying what's happening. I'm not. I'm looking at the science, and that's what the science is telling me, that current policies don't work. If we're going to get global warming, and we probably are, then we're going to get it. It's not going to affect Britain that much, but to the extent that it is, making us poorer will make matters worse, not better. And then you start to think about the massive questions for places in the world where this really will matter and how that's going to ramify to us. And those are the real questions that now need answering, and I need thinking about. Guess what? No one's answering them. No one's thinking about them.
No, and actually, to finish, the point is that actually too few people are noticing and making the point. I mean, all you're doing is looking at the very data that justifies some of the policy and pointing out that, on the data, and empirically, it's not working. You're noticing that.
Absolutely unambiguously not working.
You're making the point. I think we need to and be realistic. I always want realism in all our responses to everything. Listen, thanks very much. That's very thought-provoking. Thank you.
Okay.